Have you ever written a sentence, read it back, and thought, yep, that's perfect, only to have someone point out a huge grammar mistake? You are definitely not alone. It's this weird thing where even native speakers can feel completely baffled by grammar rules. So today we're going to get into why grammar can feel so impossible, and way more importantly, what you can actually do about it.
And it all kicks off with this really relatable cry for help from a Reddit user named Toolkits. They're a writer, a native English speaker, but when it comes to writing fiction, they're just stuck, completely lost in the woods with verb tenses. And I think we've all felt that at some point, right?
So, this is the sentence that started it all. To the writer, it flowed perfectly. It sounded right. But to their readers, oh, that one little word, passes, was like a record scratch. And that tiny mistake just opened up a total floodgate of confusing and contradictory advice.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to unpack that writer's nightmare and figure out why the advice they got was so all over the place. Then, we'll get into the two fundamental ways people learn this stuff. After that, we'll explore how you can find the right balance for you. And finally, we'll give you a practical toolkit to really break through and get better.
Okay, let's dive right into the problem. When our writer asked for help, they were just bombarded with opinions from every direction. And this is where the real confusion starts, because it seems like no two people agree on the right way to fix it.
So, first up, you get the rule followers. This person is basically saying, look, grammar has rules. Pick a tense, I recommend past tense, and do not deviate from it, period. It's a very black and white, structured way of looking at language.
And then, literally right after that, you get the complete opposite. This person's like, forget the rules. You're a native speaker, you have a gut feeling for this stuff, trust your ear. This is all about intuition, not rule books.
And then there's this third camp, which, well, their advice is basically to just give up. This commenter thinks studying grammar will actually mess up the writer's natural voice. Their solution? Just write whatever you want and plan on hiring a good editor to clean it all up later.
So you've got three totally different pieces of advice. Follow the rules religiously, just go with your gut, or don't even bother trying. It's no wonder people feel lost. It leaves you with this huge question, who on earth is right here? How are you supposed to improve when the experts can't seem to agree?
Well, to get an answer, we need a way to organize all this chaos. And luckily for us, language experts have been arguing about this for, over 100 years. It turns out all that conflicting advice actually fits neatly into two big categories. And it all boils down to these two ideas, explicit and implicit learning. Just think of it like this. Explicit learning is like following a recipe to bake a cake, very specific step-by-step instructions. Implicit learning is more like learning to cook by feel. You just kind of absorb it through experience until you know what works.
Let's look a little closer at that recipe approach. Explicit instruction is probably what you remember from school. The teacher stands at the board, explains a rule, here's how you conjugate this verb, and then you do a bunch of drills. It's all very conscious, very deliberate, and totally focused on the rules.
Now, that cooking by feel method, implicit learning, is a whole different ballgame. This is all about picking things up subconsciously. You learn just by using the language, by reading books you love, chatting with friends, or binging a TV show. You start to recognize the patterns without anyone ever writing a rule on a whiteboard.
And you can see these two ideas play out perfectly right back in that Reddit thread. Here's a user carefully breaking down every single verb tense. This is textbook explicit learning. They're literally saying, here are the rules, here are the examples.
And then, right alongside it, you have this. It's that advice we saw before, telling the writer to trust their gut. This is a pure and simple implicit learning argument. The idea is that the knowledge is already in your brain. You just absorbed it naturally, and now you just need to trust it.
So, it begs the question, why do we even have these two competing philosophies? Well, this whole debate is nothing new. It's basically the central story of how we've taught languages for the last 150 years.
If you look at the history, it's like a pendulum swinging back and forth. Back in the 19th century, it was all about explicit rules. That was the grammar translation method. Then people got tired of that, and the pendulum swung towards the direct method, which was more implicit, more natural. By the 1970s, it swung even further with something called communicative language teaching, which said fluency is way more important than perfect accuracy. So all that conflicting advice on Reddit, it's just an echo of this huge century-old debate.
Okay, history is interesting and all, but let's get to the real question. What actually works best for people trying to learn today? What do learners themselves actually want?
And this is where the data gets really fascinating. A study asked students exactly that, and check out these results.
64.7% of them said they prefer having grammar rules explained on the board. That's the explicit recipe approach. But at the exact same time, an identical 64.7% said they prefer learning through stuff like books and movies, the implicit learning by feel approach.
So what does that tell us? The big takeaway here is that it's not a choice between one or the other. Learners don't want just the rulebook, and they don't want just real-world practice. They want both. The magic really happens when you find a way to combine the two.
All right, so if we know that a blended approach is the way to go, how do we actually do that? How do you get unstuck when you feel like you've hit a wall? Let's get into a practical toolkit that can help you break through that plateau. Okay, one super powerful technique that perfectly blends both worlds is spaced repetition. You use an app like Anki to explicitly create flashcards for the rules or words you always mess up. Then, the app has you review them implicitly. It shows you the card right before you're about to forget it. It's a really smart, efficient way to get that stuff locked into your long-term memory. And beyond any single technique, it's really about your mindset. You got to check in with your goals so you stay motivated. And please, embrace your mistakes. They're not failures. They're just signposts telling you what to work on next. Keep your routine fresh so you don't get bored. Try to have real conversations. And maybe most importantly, know that taking a break is not the same as giving up. It's just part of the process. And it's worth a quick mention that this whole framework of explicit versus implicit learning isn't just a random idea. It's grounded in some really solid academic work, like this research out of Malmo University, which really helped clarify how both teachers and students think about these two paths.
So we'll leave you with this. Grammar doesn't have to be this impossible mountain to climb. It's not about choosing between being a strict rule follower or a free-spirited intuitive. The real progress comes from finding your balance. So now that you know about the two paths, the explicit and the implicit, how are you going to mix the rulebook with the real world to get to that next level?